Well, happy Easter to you. Happy Easter to you. There we go. So honored you're here. If you're a guest, my name is Matthew Johnson. I'm the lead pastor here, and we really are honored that you're with us today. And what we often say, and we mean it, is that we hope that while you're here, and we hope this for everyone, that you experience the life-changing presence of a loving God. And that is something that we've all experienced, hopefully at some point in our life, and if not, I pray that you experience that very soon. If you have your Bibles, get a head start and turn to the book of Luke. That's right. We're actually going to continue in Luke today. It's Easter. We're going to be in Luke chapter 2. I know a few of you are gun-shy right there because at the Good Friday service, I played a joke on you and we didn't turn to Luke. But you can go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 2, and we're going to continue with that. But I want to first just kind of introduce an idea to you. As I think about our lives, one of the truths that I've come to terms with is that we all strive for something in our lives. And I don't think it's just one area. I think if we take a moment and evaluate the decisions that we make and the effort that we put out, that all of us are striving towards something. And so you can think about all the different facets of your life, and you'll realize that in each one of them, you are putting a lot of intentional energy toward a goal. So if you think about your job, for most of you, you have some type of full-time employment, whether it's working in a building or it's a stay-at-home parent. I mean, that's still a full-time job. But in your job, there are just things that you are striving for. It could be a sales number. It could be a quota. It could be a project that you're working on. But you're striving to meet an end. You're striving. Maybe it's just to make your boss happy. Maybe it's to connect with your coworkers. But you have a goal in mind as you go to work. I mean, for some of you, even as I look around this room and I realize your different professions, I can imagine that in each one it's so different. But yet we all can come to terms with this truth. We're striving for something in our jobs. And I think it's the same way in our families. I know for me, I'm a father of 4, and Mary and I are very much striving towards so many different areas with our kids. I mean, on one area, we want our kids to maintain the pace in academics, and so our schools are really good at telling you where your kid is in that process, and so we have some pressure there. So we work with them in their homework, and we go over stuff with them, and we talk about different things. And I'll just tell you, my oldest son is in 3rd grade. I should know that quicker than I just did, but is he in 3rd? Yeah, he's in 3rd grade. I'm sorry, man. It was like, glad my wife will be at tomorrow's service. All right, but he's in 3rd grade, and I'll tell you, he brings home his homework, and it already makes me feel stupid. I mean, I'm at that point where he's like, Dad, how do you do this? And I look at it, and I got to admit, I pulled out my phone and Googled things as I'm helping my 3rd grader with homework, and then I kind of look at it, then I tell him, and he's like, oh, Dad, you're so smart. I'm like, yeah, that's right. I got an app for that, But we have a goal with our kids, and it's more than just academics. I mean, we have a goal with our kids for how they're going to be socially. And my wife is really good at this with our kids, training them to look people in the eye and talk to them and respond when they talk to them. And we have goals for them even amongst themselves. We want our kids to love each other. We want them to be kind to each other. And so we work toward that end. And then just as a family as a whole, we have spiritual goals that we're striving for. I mean, I want my kids not just to know of God. I want my kids to know God. I want them to experience His love in their life. And I can say almost without fail, every single day of their life, we have prayed that over them, that at a very early age that they will come to know God's love in their life. And because we're striving to reach some goals that we've set as a family, and I could go on and on in that area. But we're also striving for something in our relationships. Each one of us, whether it's friendships, I know that I've been blessed my entire life of having good, close friends. And I know in those areas, I mean, I want them to trust me. I want to trust them. I want them to bless me. I want to bless them. And I have goals for that. If you're single, you're most likely at some point, depending on where you are in being single, you're striving to find that person where your heart can connect with their heart. And so you have some goals that you're going for. Or we can look at our bodies. I mean, we strive for things in our bodies. Obviously, some of us more than others. And I'm not at all judging anyone because I'm just blessed with a fast metabolism. Besides that, it would be really a rough picture if I didn't have that. But for some of you, you're really disciplined. And I know that because you post it on Facebook every time. And just kidding. No, I'm not kidding. It's serious. All right, but some of you are really purposed, and so you watch what you eat, and you exercise, and what you'll acknowledge is you're striving for something. You want your body to look a certain way. You want your numbers, your health numbers to look a certain way, whether it be your weight or your blood pressure. And so you're striving toward a goal. Or then we can look at our finances. And we are striving, and for some of you, it's at this point, it's just maintaining or surviving maybe. That's what you're striving for, and you're just at that season of life where maybe bills are larger than your income, and there's that pressure and there's that stress, and so you're striving for survival, or maybe you're striving for maintaining, or maybe you're a little bit more disciplined or further along in life, and you're trying to invest, and you're trying to think about retirement, and you're thinking about the future, and so you're striving toward a goal, or maybe in your finances, you're doing so well that you're striving toward how you're going to spend your money, and you're thinking about that boat, or you're thinking about that house, or that car, or that vacation, but you're striving towards something. Then we have our marriages. And in our marriages, we strive for something. Hopefully, I really do hope that you have a goal in your marriage. I mean, for Mary and I, from the moment we got married, we were striving to become better at being married. And just yesterday, or actually 2 days ago, I think it was, yesterday or 2 days ago, Mary and I were talking, and I said, you know, we've been married for going on almost 13 years now, and I said, as we look back in our marriage in the beginning, we were happy, but do you think our marriage was healthy? And she said, I mean, and I was actually kind of disappointed because she answered it so quickly, but I said, do you think our marriage was healthy? And she was like, no. I was like, yeah, me either, all right? And But here's the thing. We were happy, but we realize now, 13 years later, we've been very, very intentional in our marriage to become happier, to be more focused on each other's needs. And so we have been striving, and we strove. Let me just introduce this word. Strove is the past tense of strive. I know it because I Googled it, okay? If you're in England, it's strived, but here it's strove, okay? So I'm not making up words, all right? You might not have judged me, but as I kept saying, I thought, that sounds weird, all right? So let's move on, okay? Because you're all looking at me like, move on, all right? So in our marriage, though, we have strove for health in our marriage. And then we look at even how we feel in the community. I mean, we are striving for something in our community. That's why every time there's some type of proposal that's put out in front of us, we look at it and we evaluate if we're going to vote yes or no on it based on what we desire for our community. And the same thing in any type of politics, whether we're thinking about it for our state or our country. A politician comes, and what he is saying to you or she is saying to you is she's giving you her or his ideas, and you're evaluating, does this meet the direction that you're striving for in your life? And if we're honest, most of us vote very much selfishly. We think about our lives, and that's not necessarily an insult. I'm just saying we're pretty self-focused in that moment, but we're striving towards something. And we can go on and on to maybe some things that are even more superficial. I mean, we're striving for things in our houses. How many of you are like that? I mean, it comes springtime, and all of a sudden now you want your grass to look green, and you want your plants to be healthy, and you're trimming things, and you're mowing your yard, and you're fertilizing, and you're painting your house, and you're remodeling, you're redecorating, you're getting new windows, and then maybe it's a car that you have, and as soon as it gets nice out, you wash your car, or maybe you buy a new car, and it's time to upgrade, and maybe it's something even deeper in your life, though. Maybe you're striving for influence, or you're striving for authority, or you're striving for recognition. I think a lot of people are striving for recognition. That's why there's so many selfies out there. Honestly, I know I'm kind of making fun of it, but there is a part of our personality and our hearts right now that's even striving to be recognized by other people. That is one of, I think, a good thing of Facebook, and also a potential negative, is that we're constantly putting out there what we do, because if we're being honest, a lot of us need to be recognized. A lot of us feel kind of alone, and we don't feel valued, and we don't feel worth in our lives, so we strive to get attention. How many people will like it? How many people will share it? How many people will make a comment? And it's obviously in all the different forms of media. So whether it's Instagram or Pinterest or Twitter, and so there's a part of us that we're striving towards something. Now, I could go on, but I'm not, because I think you get the point. But here's the question I would have for you, and please answer this honestly, but is anyone else tired of being in a constant state of striving? Is anyone else? I mean, I know for me, I was just tired going over that list. There's halfway through I wanted to stop for a water break, but I know in my life there's just a point where I think, I'm tired of striving. But this is the kind of the race that we're in our lives, is we're striving towards something. And so the question I would ask is, why are we striving so much? Now, if I can make a very broad statement, an overgeneralization, and I'm going to use a simple word, but I think you will understand what I'm trying to say. I think the reason that we're striving so hard in our lives is, just to use a very simple term, is we're striving to be happy. That's what we want, and you can use different terms. I would probably normally in my own life use the term life. I'm striving to experience life. That's how I view the fullness of life. But you might use happiness, you might use peace, you might use just being satisfied in your life. But I'm just going to use the term happy. I think if we're honest, all of us are striving in every area of our lives to some degree to simply be happy. So in our jobs, we want to do what our boss tells us. We want to meet those numbers. We want to meet that quota. We want to finish that project, because when we do that, everybody's happy. Our boss hopefully is happy, and we're happy. Or we look at our families. When our kids do what we hope they do, it makes us happy, and it makes them happy. And when our kids obey and our kids are getting along, it makes everybody happy, right? And when they're not getting along, it's like living in a bad place, okay? But then we understand, we go down the list, when our finances are in order and we reach the goal of our finances, what we're striving toward, we're happy. And in our marriages, when we treat each other the way that we expect and the way that we desire, we're happy, and we want that. Or when our politician gets elected, we're happy for a month or two, and then the reality sets in with that, and we buy clothes, we buy a house, and we buy cars, and we get the influence, we get the authority, and what we're honestly desiring in our lives is happiness. That's what we want. Now, how many of you understand what I'm saying, whether or not you agree with me or not? You understand this is what so much of our energy is being pushed toward, okay? So I want to put pause on that just for a second, so just keep that in mind. Now, I want to switch gears for a second, and I'll come back to that. As I was thinking about this in our lives, I thought, everything we strive for in one way or another is aimed at bringing us something we desire. And as I was thinking about that even more, I was thinking every intentional behavior of our lives, every intentional decision that we make is to reach that goal. Every intentional decision is for a purpose. So I know we sometimes do accidental things. We forget an appointment. We forget this or that. But when we make an intentional decision, I think there's a purpose to it. And again, reaching toward happiness. So when I look at that in our lives, I think, okay, can we apply that same logic to God? Would we all agree that God operates with perfect purpose? Okay? You might not know God, so that's maybe an unfair question to you. But when you look through the Bible, what you see is that God operates with perfect purpose. So God has literally moved nations for his purpose. He has stirred the hearts of wicked kings. He has moved world powers. God has changed the individual personality of a person, even changing their heart, as it says about Pharaoh, that he hardened the heart of Pharaoh. God has accomplished and he's used the weather. He's used rain. He's used a drought. He's even stopped the sun for a season or a time, a day, just to allow his purpose to be accomplished. I mean, so when we look at scriptures, we realize that God operates with perfect purpose. But then here's what I want to ask today. What is it that God is striving for? What is it that God is going after? I mean, in our lives, if every purpose decision we make is striving towards something, what is it that God is striving for? And this is what I want to look at today, because I think the answer to this question has the potential to radically change our hearts and our minds and our actions in our lives. So let's look at Luke chapter 2. And we're going to read verses 1 through 7 to start off. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. Now, this probably sounds familiar to you, and some of you are thinking, oh, no, Matt got his sermons mixed up. He's preaching the Christmas message, and because this is a Christmas story, I realize where I'm at, okay? This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered, each to his own town. Here, let me just share kind of a cute story with you. My grandma thinks I'm awesome, okay? Hopefully all your grandmas think you're awesome. And I was talking to her this week, and my grandparents were in ministry for like 50 years, and so she was just telling me she loves my sermons. And my grandma, she's not so subtle. She'll email me and say, really wish I could have more sermons, and that's my cue, like email her or send her, sermons. But anyway, she said, one of the things she loves about me is that I use my Bible. And I said, Grandma, yeah, of course, I preach. That's what I'm preaching from the Bible. She said, no, I mean actually your physical Bible. She goes, I'm not judging people, but people are using iPads now, and I prefer the Bible. So it's funny, every time I think about that, I'm like, okay, Grandma, I'm going to use my Bible, all right, just a side note. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. And so we see in this most powerful and dramatic moment that God takes the form of man in Jesus. And so this is one of the most important events in all of history. As we'll look at today, this is tied to the most important event in all of history. But as we look at this, as God became man in Jesus, the question that we have to ask is why? What was the purpose of this? I mean, it's easy for us just to kind of brush over that and just think, oh, it's not a big deal because we've heard this story every single year at Christmas time. We probably read it with our families or we've heard a pastor say it, so it's easy for us just to kind of skip by, but I want you to pause for a second. If God is striving towards something, why did God become man? Was it that God needed something to be made complete? Well, no. I mean, God is perfect in every way. Was it that God was coming here to need something? Well, no. Why would God need something from his creation? He could just recreate whatever we could offer him. Was it to make God happy in some way as we strive for something? Well, no, because God is content. God doesn't need something to be made happy. So the answer to this question, in my opinion, is the most important answer to any question in your life. Why is it that God became man? It says in Philippians 2, a powerful account of this. It was talking about Jesus. It says, have this in mind amongst yourself, which is yours in Christ Jesus. So now it's referring to Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men and being found in human form. He humbled himself, becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. And what this passage is talking about is Jesus was in heaven. And he was in total glory. He had everything he could possibly ever need. He was fully God. And I want you to get your mind around this because we have some limited accounts of what it was like and will be like in heaven. And what it says in heaven is that as Jesus was there, that every living creature that was in heaven, as they came into contact with the presence of God, they worshiped him. They said things like, all glory and all honor and all praise be given to you. So he was in this perfect state, receiving all the glory, 100% complete, but he was willing to surrender that. He did not see equality with God as something to hold on to, the grasp, but he was willing to leave that, to come to earth, to take the form of his creation. This is the largest downgrade in all of history. He went from being God to being a part of his broken creation. And not only did he do that, but he humbled himself and became a servant to his creation. He served his creation. He loved his creation even though they rejected him, and ultimately his creation killed him, which meant he submitted himself even to the point of death. And so the question has to be asked, why did he do this? What was it that God was striving for? Did he need something? The obvious answer is no. We had nothing to offer him. So we have to go back even further. We have to go back to the beginning in Genesis chapter 3. And I'm going to put one verse in a moment on the screen, but I want you just to understand this story. This will be the passage. That Adam and Eve are the first of God's creation for humanity. And they're placed in the garden. And they're given everything they could ever possibly need in their life. They have communion with God. They have relationship with each other. They are just in a blessed state. But God gives them one restriction. The one restriction that God gives them is to not eat from a tree. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So this was the only restriction God gave them. And he said, if you disobey me, you're going to die. So I'm just telling you, but you have life if you continue to obey me. Then this creature, the serpent, enters the picture. I believe either he was Satan or was heavily influenced by Satan, but the serpent comes into this picture. And he starts to talk to them. And he starts to manipulate them. And what he does to manipulate them is he starts to put in their mind that there's something else to strive for. There's something else to go after. And he says things like, did God really say that? Did God really say you can't eat from the tree? And they're like, well, yeah, I think so. I don't know. They try and put some doubt in there. And he says, well, here's what God's not telling you. God's not telling you that if you actually eat of this tree, you're going to become just like God. And you're going to know the difference between good and evil. And so there's actually something God's withholding from you. So there is something more to this life than you have right now, something else you can strive toward. And so as Adam and Eve heard this, even though God, who was good to them and had promised them and had directed them and had just blessed them in every way, they chose to listen to someone else who lied to them and told them that there was something else to strive for. And so Adam and Eve both took of the fruit and they ate of the fruit. And immediately, instead of experiencing more fully life, instead of experiencing happiness as maybe they were desiring and going for, instead of becoming like God in every way and powerful like God, instead what they experienced was shame. And they experienced conflict. and they experienced separation from each other and separation from God. And now all of a sudden they felt all the weight of their sin, and eventually that would lead to physical death and spiritual death. But as God speaks to them and lays out the reality of the consequence of their behavior, he starts to list what is referred to as the curse of sin. But in verse 15, he says a very interesting thing. He says, he's talking to the serpent now, but the serpent represents Satan. He says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. This is poetic language, prophetically speaking, but what he's saying is, he's saying to the serpent, who is, again, represented Satan, he says, this is the reality for your life, is there's going to be constant conflict from now on between you and all those who follow you and the humanity. There's going to be constant conflict. But he says, eventually, from a woman, talking about Mary, what we just read in Luke chapter 2, eventually from a woman, there's going to come her offspring, which would be Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ is going to, I actually like the NIV translation better, is going to crush your head, and you're going to bruise his heel, which is referring to what all the physical punishment that was inflicted upon the body of Jesus. But the reason I want to highlight that is in the moment of sin, in the moment of this time, of the weight of this, God's response is, from this point on, I'm striving for something different. I'm striving for the restoration of my children. And this is remarkable because this is not what we would expect. A holy, perfect God who gives everything to his creation, and then his creation rebels. You would think in that moment God would say, well, you selfish little stinkers, would God use that term, and we reject them. But instead what God does is says, from this point forward, I'm letting you know. So right now, there is consequence to your sin, but let me tell you, there's going to come a day when all of this is going to change. It's going to, we know, be thousands of years. But when this day happens, everything's going to change. And he lets the serpent know, and let me tell you what's going to happen, serpent. The Son of God is going to crush your head, and I'm going to redeem my children back. Because they were mine, but you stole them from me. But I'm willing to pay the price once again to have them back as my children. And so from this point on, God's whole pursuit, God's purpose, and what God is striving for is to win back his children. To get us back, to get us to come to trust him once again. And so when we go back to Luke and we look at this account, this is the account of God becoming man. And again, it's familiar because it's a Christmas passage, but it says this, and in the same region there were shepherds out in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night, and an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them. And they were filled with great fear, and the angel said to them, fear not. So this is what the angel speaks about the birth of Jesus. Fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy that will be for who? All people. He says, and this is good news. So way back when he says, bad news, you sinned, but now he's saying, this is good news for everyone. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior. So someone who's going to save you, who is Christ the Lord, and this will be a sign for you. You will find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of heavenly hosts praising God and saying, glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among those with whom he is pleased. When the angels went away from them into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, let us go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has made known to us. And they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in a manger. And when they saw it, they made known the saying that had been told them concerning this child. And all who heard it wondered at what the shepherds told them. But Mary treasured up all these things, pondering them in her heart. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they heard and seen, as it had been told them. And at the end of 8 days, when he was circumcised, he was called Jesus, the name given by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. And so we have this incredible story, and I want to highlight this for this reason. As Jesus is being born, this is God's introduction to the world. Now, if you were in charge and you were God becoming man, that's already such an incredible gift to humble yourself to that form. But as God is making known to the world and coming into the world, and he could have dictated any way in which to enter the world, we look at how God chose to do it. God chose first to be birthed through a peasant girl, a nobody. A girl that was probably 13 or 14 years old, very poor, from a nothing of a community. And God says, she'll be the perfect girl to carry my son. And then they go to Bethlehem, and there's not even a place to give birth that is of any bit appropriate. God doesn't choose a palace. God doesn't choose a place of prominence. God doesn't even choose a clean place. He allows his child, his son, to be born in a barn and then placed into a manger, a dirty manger. But then on top of that, God could have now proclaimed to the world, his son is born. But he doesn't choose Caesar. He doesn't choose Herod. He doesn't choose someone of power, someone of influence, someone of wealth. Instead, he chooses ordinary shepherds who would have been very dirty and poor and very much uneducated men in the middle of a field. And God says, these are the perfect people to tell this message to, because I want this to be good news to all people. And I'm showing you right now, I'm picking the lowest of the low to speak this message to. Good news, a Savior has been born. And what God was demonstrating, that if it's good news even to the lowest of low, it's good news for everyone. And so Jesus comes, and he comes into the earth, and he lives a life, a perfect life. But what does Jesus find? And I want us to think about this for a second. What does Jesus find as he goes into the world? Does he find people who are self-sufficient? Does he find people who don't need him? Does he find people who are doing good? No. Jesus finds people who are weak. People who are powerless to change their life, people that are sinners, people that are enemies of God. And he goes throughout, and as he comes across people, what he discovers is that the people are broken. He found total brokenness and death and sadness and fear and heartache and confusion. But he wasn't shocked by this, because this was the reason that he came. This was his purpose. This is what he strove for. And we see some accounts in Matthew 9:12. He says this, but when he heard it, he said, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And this is what Jesus said, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. And then in Matthew 9:36, he says, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. So as he looked at the people who were broken, he wasn't disgusted by them. He didn't look at their brokenness and he wasn't turned off by it. He looked at the brokenness of the world and he had compassion. I mean, in his heart, he was saying, this is the reason I came. I came to help these people. I came to bless these people. And the reason it's important to know this is nothing has changed. As God steps into your brokenness and steps into your life situation, no matter what you've done in your past, God is not broken by it. God is not fearful of it. God has compassion for it in your life. And his birth, as we looked at it today, was part of the greatest event in history. And you might think, well, today's Easter. Aren't we celebrating the resurrection? But what we have to understand is there are 4 parts that make up one event. The entire life and ministry of Jesus is really one event. It's the greatest event in history. But there's 4 parts to it. And each one of these are connected. Without each one of these, the other ones cease to exist. And so the first part of the greatest event is his birth. Just on a practical note, if he doesn't come, then there is no life, there is no death, there is no resurrection. So at this point, we know that there's just a practical side. But this incredible event is that God became man. That God did not stay up in heaven distant from his broken creation, that he stepped down in humility to connect to us, to win us back. And so the first part of the greatest event is his birth. But then here's the second part, is the perfect life that he lived. He experienced all that we experience. And I think sometimes we lose sight of this. It says that Jesus was tempted in every way like us. Now think about the temptations that you struggle with. Think about the ones you think are unique to you. Think about the times that you've been tempted with despair. Jesus was. Think about the times that you've been tempted with anger. Jesus was. Think about the times you've been tempted sexually. Jesus was. And we don't want to think that way. We want to almost sanctify the temptations of God. But Jesus, in every single way, was tempted like us. And he experienced it on even a greater level than we do. His best friends turned away from him. His creation that he came to serve mocked him. And they tried to trick him. And they hurled insults at him. And they rejected him. And eventually they killed him. But his best, closest friends at times failed to understand what he was teaching, and they ran away from them. They betrayed him. He experienced every emotion that we did, that we have in our lives. But not only did he do that, but he lived the perfect life, qualifying him to be the perfect sacrifice for us. Because God had laid out for all his people, he says, when you sin, this is in the law, when you sin, in order to be redeemed, you have to sacrifice a spotless lamb, which means you have to find a lamb that doesn't have any defects, didn't have any markings on it, and every time you sinned for your nation, you would sacrifice a lamb, and this would provide forgiveness of sins. All of this that would go on for thousands of years was foreshadowing, so that when Jesus came and lived a perfect life, he became the spotless lamb, without defect, without markings. He had no sin in his life. But I want you to think about that for a moment. If someone is perfect, that's something to be celebrated. If someone goes through life living generously, giving grace to people, healing the sick, touching people that no one else touched, encouraging people, speaking life, literally raising people from the dead, that's not a person you kill, that's a person you elevate. That's a person you celebrate. But Jesus, his life, which was perfect, led to the third part of the event, and that is his death on the cross. And in that moment, the reason that God had to die on the cross was that this was the perfect sacrifice to alleviate the wrath of God and the anger of God that was being built up for generation after generation because of our sin. As we taught on the Good Friday service, Jesus became the propitiation, which meant he was the sacrifice that satisfied what sin required. See, sin required punishment and sin required death. And so Jesus took our place and he went to the cross and he died. Even though he was perfect, he died and took all the punishment upon his body. The mocking, the ridicule, them punching him, them whipping him and putting a crown of thorns on his head and making fun of him and then leading him, stripping him naked to put him on a cross, to humiliate him and to violently murder him. The reason he did this was for us, so that God could look down and say, all of sin has been paid for, and now God and us could be in right standing together. But if the story stopped here, so as we see, without a birth, there is no life and death. Without a perfect life, there's no point to a death. But as we look at this, the birth, the life, and the death, if it stopped here, we would never be celebrating Jesus. If it stopped here, he would just be another person who did cool things while he was alive, but then he died. But it didn't stop here, because he was killed on Friday, but on the third day, on Sunday, he got up and walked out alive from the tomb. I mean, think about that. And if you have any doubt, just understand this. People now 2,000 years later are celebrating across the world this one event, because it's the only thing that makes sense, is he was dead and now he's alive. And the reason that this impacts our lives is that all four of these come together, these four events, to show the perfect purpose of God, that God is striving for us. This is why Jesus came. And I want you to hear me right now. Jesus came, and his purpose has not changed. He came because he was striving for man, and even today, Jesus is striving for you. All of you that are here today, every single one of you, whether you've made a commitment to Christ or not, Jesus is striving for you. Jesus came not for his happiness, and this is such a remarkable idea. He came not for his happiness, he came for ours. So the irony of it is both of us, all of us, are all striving toward the same goal. We're striving toward our happiness. The problem is we're running on a path that doesn't lead to happiness, but Jesus is striving for our happiness. And he's saying to you today, if you will trust him and come to his path, you will experience the fullness of life. See, we had nothing to offer Jesus when he came. And we still have nothing to offer in and of ourselves. We are worthless. But the value of our lives is shown in that God loved us enough to come to the earth for our sins. He was willing to buy us back with his own life. Matthew 20, verse 28 says this. This is out of the mouth of Jesus. Even as the Son of Man, talking about himself, came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus said, I'm willing to die. I'm willing to pay the price because I want my children back. I want to redeem them. Because here's the truth. We were dead, so he came and died. He was resurrected so we might live. It's the only way it could happen. It's the only way we could be in right standing with God. And I'll tell you, his striving hasn't stopped. He still strives, he still pursues, he still calls. So the question I have for us today, as you think about your life, and again, I'm speaking to both Christians and non-Christians alike. What is it that you're still striving for? What are you running from? Because in our lives, it's not just that we run away from things or we run towards something. It's oftentimes both of those. And so the question I have for you is, what are you hoping for in your life? What is it that today that you just feel like I need to have this to experience life? No matter where you're from, of what you've done, Jesus is one step away. And I want that to sink in. And as the band starts to play, I want you to think about this truth. No matter what you've done or where you're from, Jesus is one step away in your life. Because if you take 10 steps away from Jesus, he's still one step away because he's striving for you. In our minds, as we think about the economy of God, it sometimes really baffles us because we think if I take 10 steps away from God, I must be 10 steps away from God. But what you're not taking into account is that Jesus is always pursuing you. Jesus is always coming after you. And even when you go into the darkest place, where you go into a darkest place relationally, a dark place mentally, a dark place emotionally, a dark place spiritually, and you think God can't be here, if you just turn around, what you will realize is Jesus is right there. Because when Jesus came to the earth, he came to the darkest place that was known to man. He came to the darkest place full of sin, a place that was so ugly and dirty in comparison to heaven, and he was willing to risk it all to come to the earth, and he's still willing to risk it all. He's still willing to come after you wherever you are in your life because he loves you. And again, it's not about our worth, it's about his love. And I want to say this, if you're here today, it's because God wanted you to hear this message because God loves you. And if you were invited by a friend or you were invited by a family member, here's good news. They wanted you to hear this message because this love changed their life. And the reason you're here today is that they want you to experience the life-changing power of Jesus Christ. But what we do in our lives, we think, no, that can't be. That's too simple. That's too easy. I have to play a part in this. And I would tell you, you don't. You need to stop striving. You need to stop running. You need to stop crawling or whatever you're doing and just turn around and see that Jesus is right there. And even for you as Christians, for some of you, you're still having so much guilt and so much shame upon you. If you just turn around, Jesus is there just to take that away from you. That he would say to you, if he had a moment of your time, if Jesus came in here and only had 1 minute to spend with you, I promise you he would not use that minute to tell you about your sin. He would use that minute to tell you about the cross. And he would tell you about how much he loves you. But what we have to do is we have to surrender all the baggage to him. We have to surrender our lives to him. And I'll tell you, there is no other way to be saved because God has not given us another way. In Acts 4:12 it says this, there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. Here's just another way to word it. There's no other option. There's no other way. There's no possibility of a better way. He did all the work. So all your striving in your life, as we said in the beginning, all your striving is to experience happiness or to experience life. Jesus strove for that same purpose so that you can experience true life.